Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Just watching those ads actually reminds me about some of the conversations we had about 2 years ago when we started on, to use a very cliched term, this journey about reforms that was required indeed in the tourism industry in itself, and of course more so within Tourism Fiji. As many of you would know that before Tourism Fiji, we had Fiji Vistas Bureau. It sounds very bureaucratic, and we needed to change that. We had Fiji Trade and Investment Bureau. It's now called Investment Fiji. We had Fiji Audiovisual Commission. Now it's called Film Fiji. We, of course, had Air Pacific. It's now Fiji Airways. I'd like to just reflect very, very briefly when we started this off 2 years ago. And when I had the discussions with the then board, and of course the PS was there, and none of this actually has happened because it just happened. It actually happened because we had a game plan. It required a very concerted and a very focused effort into revamping the entire focus of Tourism Fiji and indeed the industry. But we needed to get a lot of the things in-house right. And I think in the tourism industry we tend to be very nice to each other and friendly with each other and perhaps not talk about some of the dirty words, and I don't mean in the other sense, but I'm talking about things like transparency. I'm talking about things like good governance and about ensuring that we get a very good rate of return on our investment. Because as you know, the Bainimarama government has now, for the past 4 years or 5 years, I lost track, has been giving unprecedented funding, which has meant that Tourism Fiji, and indeed you as all stakeholders, are able to plan for the future and not be concerned about, well, it's going to change the next year, depending on how the government feels at that particular moment in time. We recognize from the onset that tourism plays a critical role in the Fijian economy. It now contributes about 33% towards our GDP. We expect that to grow. We also had a very big focus on ensuring that the tourism dollar, as much as possible, is retained in Fiji. In other words, we wanted the tourism dollar to in fact flow on to the towns, the villages, the settlements, the areas all outside the properties that tourists come to, and indeed within the properties themselves. This is why, for example, now you have the Reserve Bank of Fiji offering scholarships to chefs for training offshore if they use Fijian foods or Fijian products. Because that is our next step in terms of how best do we utilize the tourism dollar within Fiji and how it should stay within Fiji. So of course numerous changes have taken place. There was an audit that was carried out within Tourism Fiji itself to look at perhaps some of the anomalies that existed and how best we could then position Tourism Fiji for the 21st century. As you know, that with changing technology, with changing times, with changing tactics, not just within Fiji but outside Fiji, and indeed, as many of you would know, tourism is a very competitive industry. We're competing globally. We're not competing only in the South Pacific. We're competing globally, and we need to understand that. And I think perhaps sometimes I got this sense initially that we did not necessarily appreciate that fact. In order to be able to position Fiji, we need to look at the big picture. We can come to forums and all feel good about each other and have a few drinks and have wonderful conversations, but we need to also get a reality check. And that's what we did 2 years ago. We got a reality check on the tourism industry in Fiji and indeed Tourism Fiji. So we've had a number of changes. As you know, last year we had revamping of the website, which I know many of you are still getting used to, and it is actually developing, and indeed quite a bit of work needs to be done. Well, a bit more work needs to be done to make it a lot more interactive, to make it a lot more meaningful for you, and indeed those who come to that website. We've also had some significant personnel changes in Tourism Fiji, and that has been critical, and it is important, because as a government we believe that we need to have the right people with the right qualifications to be able to deliver to us the huge investment that we are making. I mean, I know people have said that I think what government contributes, about $23.5 million, is probably a fifth of what the private sector does in terms of its ad campaigns, etc. But of course, you're doing that for your own properties, we are doing it for our own country. But notwithstanding that, the point is that government has now put in unprecedented funding into infrastructure, whether it's roads, whether it's water, whether it's electricity. And that has a direct impact on your business. It has direct impact on our ability, both as a country and as an individual property, to be able to attract tourists to Fiji. And whether it's the fiscal incentives we are providing, now you can import vessels for, I think, 5 or 10% duty rate. You can import fully made buses from offshore, and many of you have taken advantage of that for 10%. You can now, for example, get duty-free concessions on numerous plants and machinery that you require for your businesses. So these are some of the incentives we provided, of course, with the corporate tax rate now being 20%. Personal income tax was reduced for 90.5% of Fijian taxpayers, which we have actually helped you to give your staff a pay rise without you actually forking it out of your pockets. Because they are now taking more dollars in their pockets than they did before. Puts less pressure on you also. So it's a holistic approach to, of course, the country, but of course in particular with the tourism sector. Now, the other point, I have to write down points nowadays because I tend to forget things. You know, like I said, I've had a few people who've said to me, well, you know, there's all these personnel changes are being made, and I've explained to them why they're taking place. And as I've said, with the CEO and the board, they're putting the best people in to do the best job. And I'm sure you've seen today the fruits of that. And we've also had a graduate trainee program. We're now taking more graduates who will be trained, and they need to perform, of course. People need to perform to be able to stay within the game, otherwise they cannot stay in the game. We have now also, ladies and gentlemen, put in place a number of other incentives which I think I need to talk to you about, because overall this is probably one of the few times that we get together as an industry, generally as to what is happening within the economy, what is happening in the governance of the country in itself. You may have seen, for example, we've now put in place, as announced by the Honourable Prime Minister, an environmental levy on the increase in the departure tax, a $10 environmental levy. Those pictures that you have seen, beautiful corals, fish, etc., they can actually go away within a few years if we're not careful about that. That type of imaging will not be possible in Fiji if we don't look after our environment. And it is absolutely critical. You know, if you go to some of the other Pacific Island countries, some of the capital cities in those Pacific Island countries, the way in which they have mismanaged the environment is actually quite terrible. And we can actually go down that path if we are not careful. For the first time in Fiji's history, next year, as announced by the Prime Minister, we're having a waste transfer station in Nasinu. Unheard of. Nearly 300,000 people now live between Nasori and Lami. Not many people can afford to take their rubbish from Nasori all the way to the Namboro landfill. So what do? They go and dump it at the Suva foreshore, or the public garbage bins, or they simply dump it outside. So we've started a waste transfer station that will commence operations next year, where people can come and dump their rubbish. We'll sort it out for them. Those that can be recycled will be recycled. Those that need to be transferred to the Namboro landfill will be done so. So it's in our effort to put a certain amount of money earmarked for the environment, and we need to obviously expand those types of services. That will continue, and it is something that obviously sells well too. When you go to, when your airline ticket shows that there's a $10 environmental levy, the tourists actually feel that they're contributing towards that too. And I think it is very, very important for them to have a sense that they're making that contribution. The other important point that I'd like to highlight is the fact that the Prime Minister announced free education in the true sense of the word from next year. Primary school, secondary school. He also announced the fact that those people who get a place in a university, if they want so, they can have their tertiary fees paid for by the government by way of a soft loan. Obviously, it may affect some of you who have children who are at school age. You don't have to fork out money from your pocket. But as potential employers, it means that you'll get a better pool of people who are a lot better qualified. Because it does not only apply for degree courses, but it applies for diplomas and also certificates. So you should have, in about 5 years' time, a very well-trained employable workforce that you as employers can choose from. It also encourages, hopefully in time to come, we can extend that to postgraduate studies also. So I think it's important to position ourselves with all these incentives that have been put in place. Of course, next year you have the Fijian Tourism Expo, and I'm glad there's been a very, very positive response. It is time that we all have a specific focus on Fijian tourism at the Expo. And already I'm told by Tourism Fiji there's been a lot of takers on that. We hope that the Sheraton will have the facilities ready by then to have it under the air-conditioned roof. Don't need to be like the casino, but that we are looking forward to, ladies and gentlemen. It would be amiss of me not to talk about this. The new constitution is in place. It does have an impact on you. More directly, we've got elections next year. The elections will be held no later than 30th of September 2014. Plans are well underway. We're already planning the logistics, etc. We'll have some electoral commissioners appointed as required under the Constitution, 7 of them. We've had some problems because some people are hesitant to join because they're saying that they might get travel bans placed on them and their spouses and their uncles and grandfathers and everybody else. But that, of course, is understandable, but we do have letters specifically from Australia and New Zealand governments to say that there won't be any travel bans on electoral commissioners. So if you're very competent and you believe that you can contribute towards the electoral commission, please speak to me afterwards, because we're still looking for some very good, competent people. But that's in train. And of course, you know, the reality is, ladies and gentlemen, come election year, in particular after a period of time, there'll be a lot of politicking going on. You need to be aware of that as an industry. I'm not here to fly anybody's flag, but I'm talking to you as an industry to say that these are the things that will be some of the issues that you will face as an industry next year. But that's in train. We hope to also have a day where we will set aside for the elections, and it'll be a public holiday where people can actually simply go and vote and then go off and do their normal day-to-day chores if they choose to do so. It will be held in one day, so I urge you as employers to be cognizant of that, because I know hotels are run 24/7, that you will need to give people time to go and vote if they're working on that day. We hope to have at least 2,800 to 3,000 polling stations to be able to ensure that elections are held in one day. Just to put it into perspective, Indonesia has 120 million voters spread over 6,000 islands, and they vote in 5 hours. They also count the votes wherever the votes are cast. In Fiji, we've never done that, and we plan to do that. So, for example, if there is a polling station near Liku Liku, the votes will actually be counted there. They don't have to bring it all the way to Natambua High School, because we don't know what will happen on the Liku Liku boat on the way from Liku Liku to Natambua High School. So, this is why, one of the reasons we're doing that, of course. I mean, that can apply to, of course, Malolo Lailai and everywhere else. So, ladies and gentlemen, I urge you, we've got copies of this outside for you. It's in the vernacular languages also. Please read it. It's very, very simple to read, good bedtime reading. If you want further elaboration on it, there's the Attorney General's conference this Friday and Saturday. You're most welcome to attend, but all the rooms are booked out at Intercon. But you can stay in the nearby hotels or become a day attendant. I do not want to make a very long speech. I'd like to just essentially just round off very soon. But I would like to thank all of you for your cooperation, in particular over the past 2 years, and indeed your patience. I know change can in fact sometimes be quite challenging. I've had some people say to me, you know, Fiji, where happiness finds you, that's what they say in Bhutan. They don't actually say that in Bhutan. Bhutan has their GDP, they measure happiness in their GDP. It's a very interesting concept. And in fact, every single conference I've been to, wherever the Bhutanese minister has been present, he talks about the happiness being measured under the GDP. But it's nothing to do with tourism. They have other sort of slogans. But it is something new. It is something different. It is catching on. And I thank you for your support. Thank you for your patience. And of course, I know many of you have now become perhaps a lot more relaxed about the slogan, coming to terms with it. And I think it works very well. Through the advertisements, I think they are actually quite representative of what happens in Fiji and indeed the potential. I'd like to wish all of you all the best for next year. These are some very, very interesting times for Fiji. Our growth rate is now 3.6%. It's unprecedented. Global growth rate is now 2.9%. We are at 3.6%. We've had discussions with various multilateral agencies, and they're saying that the path that Fiji is on, if this path continues, then we would have unsurpassed growth rates. We have enormous potential. We're just sitting on the cusp of it. And that's what we are focusing on, ladies and gentlemen. And our philosophy in terms of the economic model, obviously, is to be able to, as government, create an enabling environment. As the Prime Minister said, the enablers. We want to put in place the enablers. You obviously are very good at what you do. All you simply need are the enablers. And we're here to provide that to you. We're here to work together with you, collaborate with you. And once we're able to have that synergy, then of course, the world's our oyster. Thank you very much, and I wish you a very good afternoon. Vinaka.